My parents pushed me out, then gave the house I grew up with to my brother for his wedding. They had no idea the land around the house belonged to me, and this time, I was the one doing the pushing. I'm 29 years old now, but I moved out when I was 18. Well, more accurately, I was pushed out. I didn't leave because I wanted to be independent or because I had some dream to chase. I left because my parents made it clear there wasn't a place for me in the house anymore. They told me it was time to learn how the world works, that I needed to man up and make it on my own. Those were their words, not mine. I didn't argue. I packed my bags and left with whatever I could fit in a beat-up sedan I bought with the money I made working part-time at a pizza place. No graduation party, no teary goodbye, no offers of support, just a quiet closing of the door behind me. My brother Ryan, 3 years younger, had a very different experience. He was the golden boy from the start, athletic, charming, and always the center of attention. He could do no wrong. If I came home late from work, I was irresponsible. If Ryan missed curfew, it was because he lost track of time and needed rest. If I got a B+ on a math test, they asked what I did wrong. Ryan brought home a C and they laughed it off, saying, "Not everyone is a numbers guy." You get the idea. He wasn't just the favorite. He was the only one they really invested in. New clothes, a car for his 18th birthday, tutoring sports camps. Meanwhile, I bought my first laptop with 3 months of saved tips. For a long time, I convinced myself it didn't matter, that it was just how things were. I thought maybe it was just easier for them to relate to Ryan. Maybe I didn't fit their mold and that was on me. I focused on building something for myself. I worked long hours, took night classes, skipped meals to save on food, and started a small business with a buddy when I was 22. Things got better slowly. It wasn't easy, but I made it work. By 26, I had 3 full-time employees. By 28, I was doing well enough to invest in real estate. None of this was shared with my family, not out of spite, but because they never really asked. We kept in touch in the most superficial ways. A birthday text forwarded me an occasional group chat message. I'd see pictures of Ryan with my parents at fancy dinners or on vacations, places they never took me even once. I stayed cordial but distant. Not bitter, just done trying. The turning point came a few months ago when I got a call from my grandmother. She's one of the few people in the family who's ever shown me warmth without conditions. She told me Ryan was getting married. Big event venue booked, 5-course meal, custom floral arrangements, something out of a magazine. I didn't say much at first, just that I was happy for him, but I noticed something odd. "Grandma," I asked, "when's the wedding?" There was a pause on the line, a beat too long. Then she said, "Oh, I assume they told you. It's on June 10th. Invitations went out last week. I hadn't received one." "Maybe yours got lost in the mail," she said quickly, her voice a little higher than usual. "You know how the post office is these days." I could hear the strain in her voice, the way she was trying to make excuses for something she didn't agree with. I knew right then it wasn't lost. I wasn't on the list, not even a courtesy invite. I didn't say anything more about it. I thanked her for letting me know, wished her a good evening, and hung up. The next day she called me again, this time with more edge in her voice. "Jake, I talked to your mother," she said, "and I told her that if you're not invited, I'm not going. Your grandfather agrees. We're not going to stand around pretending this family is whole when they keep cutting you out." That meant a lot coming from her. She wasn't someone who stirred the pot, but she wasn't afraid to speak up when something truly bothered her. Sure enough, 3 days later, I got a last-minute invitation in the mail. One of those generic ones with the pre-printed names and a mass-produced gold foil border. No note, no call, just a single card shoved in a cheap white envelope as if they were checking off a box. I almost didn't go, but something about it nodded at me. Not the lack of invitation, not even the fact that I was clearly a second thought. It was the deeper truth behind it, that after all these years, after building my life from the ground up without their help, I was still the outsider, still the one they wanted to keep in the shadows, still the one they wanted to hide from their perfect picture. And yet now that Grandma made a fuss, they were willing to slap a Band-Aid on it and pretend I was part of the celebration. Like inviting me last minute would make me forget everything they'd done. Then I got another call, this time from a cousin who was helping with the setup. She was on speakerphone with another cousin, talking casually, when she said something that made my stomach drop. "Can you believe Ryan and Melissa are getting the house? Like the actual house? The one they grew up in? The one I grew up in?" "Yeah," the other voice chimed in. "Your aunt said they're handing over the deed as a wedding gift. Isn't that wild? I mean, they could have sold it for like $500,000 easy, but I guess it's keeping it in the family." I didn't say a word. I let them finish the conversation and hung up. I just sat there staring at the wall, piecing everything together. They didn't just kick me out at 18. They gave the house to my brother as a gift at his wedding. The same house I wasn't welcome in after high school. The same one I had to sneak back into months later when I forgot a childhood photo album and got yelled at for trespassing. That house had been erased from my life, and now it was being wrapped in a bow for the golden child. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of anger, but out of a quiet, burning clarity. There are moments in your life when the fog lifts, when the years of pretending things are okay suddenly peel away and all the patterns become visible at once. That was one of those moments for me. All the childhood slights, all the excuses, all the small humiliations that seemed forgettable at the time, they came rushing back, but this time with context. This wasn't a fluke. It wasn't just how things were. It was a pattern, a choice over and over again. So I made a choice too. I decided I would go to the wedding. Not for them, not even for Grandma, but because I had something to bring with me, something they weren't expecting. And when I finally walked into that 5-star venue in my tailored navy suit, a few heads turned. My cousin gave me a small smile. Grandma looked relieved. My mother spotted me across the room and forced a smile so tight it made her cheekbones twitch. She walked up to me, tilted her head, and said in the softest, fakest tone I've ever heard, "Jake, I'm glad you could make it. Just try not to embarrass us today." "All right," I smiled back because she had no idea what I brought with me. When my mother pulled me aside at the wedding and whispered, "Try not to embarrass us today," I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so painfully predictable. That single sentence captured everything I'd come to expect from her. Carefully veiled control, artificial politeness, and a complete inability to recognize her own hypocrisy. I just smiled back, not saying a word, but inside, something cracked, clean cold and permanent. I wasn't angry in the loud confrontational way. I was angry in the quiet surgical way that comes from years of wounds finally refusing to close. The venue was straight out of a luxury wedding block. White marble floors, gold-accented chandeliers, a string quartet playing something elegant and forgettable in the background. Guests walked around with champagne flutes snapping photos in front of a floral arch that probably cost more than my first car. Everyone was dressed to the nines. Everyone except me looked comfortable. I kept my movements slow and deliberate, watching everyone from a distance. Ryan stood across the room in his custom tux, laughing with his groomsman drink in hand. His bride Melissa was posing for pre-ceremony photos with her side of the family. All smiles and perfect posture. She was beautiful, can't deny that. The kind of elegant that magazines gush over, but she had that same polished, practiced expression as my mother. Performative kindness with a layer of cold steel underneath. I found Grandma and Grandpa at a corner table. They both looked relieved to see me, but there was a heaviness in their smiles. "I'm glad you came," Grandma said softly as she hugged me. "They can pretend all they want, but you belong here just as much as anyone else." Grandpa just squeezed my shoulder. He doesn't say much these days, but his silence usually carries more weight than most people's words. The ceremony started shortly after. White chairs, perfect aisle petals scattered by a flower girl who looked like she'd been coached within an inch of her life. The officiant spoke with the kind of poetic emptiness weddings thrive on. About love, family, unity. I kept my face still, but my mind wandered. Family. They say blood is thicker than water, but what they don't say is that water doesn't pretend. Water doesn't smile in your face while replacing you. After the vows were exchanged, the real party began. Cocktail hour flowed into dinner, which flowed into speeches. I sat at a table near the back with a few cousins I barely knew anymore. We made awkward small talk, but I mostly kept quiet. I was watching. The first speech came from my father. He stood confidently, glass in hand, and said to my son, the one who made me proud every step of the way. I blinked. It was a simple sentence, but it hit like a brick to the chest. Every step of the way. As if I didn't exist, as if he hadn't raised 2 sons, as if Ryan was the only one worth remembering. There was polite laughter, warm applause. I could feel my pulse behind my eyes. Melissa's father spoke next, then the maid of honor, then Ryan. They each told stories of triumph, loyalty, support, the kind of anecdotes you pull from a scrapbook of golden memories. Meanwhile, my entire existence had been edited out of the narrative like a deleted scene that didn't test well with the audience. And then came the moment that broke something deep inside me. The announcement. It was subtle at first. A casual mention slipped into the end of Ryan's speech, almost like an afterthought. "I can't thank my parents enough for everything they've done, including, well, this still feels unreal, giving us the house I grew up in." Applause, smiles, some gasps of admiration. A few guests turned toward my parents who were glowing like royalty. I didn't clap. I didn't blink because while everyone else heard a sweet gesture of family generosity, I heard the sound of a door being slammed in my face. Again, let me be clear. I never expected the house. I never wanted it. It wasn't about the property, it was about what it symbolized. I had been discarded from that home like a broken toy, and now it was being handed over to the one they'd always saved everything for. I got up from my table and walked outside. The evening air was cooler than I expected, and I took a few deep breaths pacing near the garden path behind the venue. I didn't cry. I haven't cried in a long time, but there was a tightness in my chest that felt unfamiliar, like grief mixed with something sharper. I leaned against a marble column and tried to collect myself. That's when I heard footsteps. It was my mother. She walked up behind me, her heels clicking against the stone walkway. "Jake," she said, placing a hand lightly on my arm. "Are you okay? You seemed off during the speeches." I turned to face her slowly. "You didn't tell me about the house," I said, voice flat. She blinked. "Well, we weren't sure if it would be the right time to—" "No," I cut in. "You just didn't want me to know until it was too late to matter." She sighed, exasperated. "This isn't about you, Jake. Don't make it about you. This is Ryan's day." I stared at her, stunned. Not because of what she said, but because she believed it. She really thought I was the one making things difficult. She really believed I was being selfish for reacting to being erased. "I'm not trying to ruin his day," I said slowly. "But you gave him the house, the same one you kicked me out of. Do you really not see how that might feel cruel?" Her smile returned thin and sharp. "We didn't kick you out. You were a man. It was time for you to stand on your own. I was 18. Exactly. Old enough." I shook my head. "So what's the difference with Ryan? Why didn't he have to stand on his own?" She tilted her head like she was speaking to someone dense. "Because he's different. He's always needed a little more support. And he gave us something to be proud of." There it was. The knife twisted without flinching. I stepped back from her touch. I think she noticed my expression shift because her tone suddenly turned icy. "Jake, I understand this is hard for you, but you've made your choices. You left. You built your own life. You should be happy for your brother." I stared at her for a long moment, then asked something I hadn't even realized I needed to ask until that moment. "Why didn't you ever come visit me?" She blinked. "What? All those years? All those birthdays? Not once. Not one visit. Not one dinner. What?" She looked uncomfortable now. She glanced around like someone might overhear. We were busy. Life got complicated. I let the silence hang. She hated silence. "You just didn't want to see me succeed without you," I said quietly. "You didn't want the reminder that I did what you said I couldn't." Her face hardened. "That's enough." "No," I said, stepping closer, my voice still calm. "You know what's enough. Me pretending that any of this ever mattered to you. I came here to be civil, but let's not lie to each other anymore. You never wanted me here. You wanted a photo op. You wanted to keep Grandma quiet." She tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. "I'm done pretending I'm the problem. I've worked too hard. I've built too much. I didn't need your house. I didn't need your help. But I deserved better than this." She folded her arms, defensive. "You don't get to come here and lecture me on what you think you deserved." "No," I said, "but I do get to remind you that you raised two sons. One of them you handed everything to, the other you threw out, and he's the one you underestimated." She scoffed, turned on her heel, and walked back inside without another word. I stayed out there for a while, the wind tugging at my jacket. Something had changed inside me. I couldn't go back in and smile through the rest of the reception. Not after that, but I wasn't done yet either because I hadn't brought just myself to the wedding. I had brought something else. A folder. A single manila folder tucked carefully inside my jacket pocket. Inside that folder was something my parents hadn't anticipated. Something I'd worked on for the past 6 months in silence ever since I started buying up property in our hometown. Something that had the power to unravel the perfect little lie they'd built. I reached into my jacket and ran my fingers across the edge of it just to remind myself it was real. They wanted a perfect wedding. They were about to get something else entirely, and I hadn't even made my move yet. I didn't go back inside the reception hall after that conversation with my mother. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I finally understood something I'd spent years trying to ignore. I didn't belong in that world. Not their version of it. I stood outside beneath the twinkle lights lining the back garden, listening to the muffled laughter and clinking glasses echoing through the walls. The house I grew up in had been gift-wrapped and handed off like a party favor, and I was expected to smile about it, to clap politely, to pose for pictures, to pretend. But the thing about pretending is, eventually it breaks you. I walked to my car alone. No goodbyes, no hugs, not even a text afterward. Just silence. The kind of silence that used to crush me years ago, the kind that made me question if I was the problem. But this time it was different. This time the silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful because I was done waiting for their approval and I was finally ready to focus on what I was building. Still, for a few weeks after the wedding, I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left the shell to keep walking around. I went through the motions, showed up at the office, signed contracts, answered emails. But I was distracted, numb. It wasn't the house that hurt. It was the finality of it all. The realization that they weren't going to change, that there wasn't some secret version of my parents waiting to show up one day and say they were proud of me. That fantasy was gone. I spent a few late nights in my office, just sitting in the dark thinking about that kid who packed his life into 2 duffel bags at 18 and drove off with no roadmap, just the need to prove something. That version of me hadn't expected luxury. He just wanted to matter. I wish I could say there was a big dramatic turning point, some lightning bolt of clarity, but there wasn't. Just small, quiet choices that slowly reshaped my world. Like the morning I showed up early to our main property, the one I'd renovated from a crumbling duplex into 6 high-end studio apartments. One of the tenants, an older guy named Lou, was out front struggling with a busted grocery bag rolling across the sidewalk. I picked them up without thinking. He thanked me, then said, "You the owner?" "Yeah," I said, brushing off my jeans. He looked surprised. "Huh, you're younger than I figured." We chatted for a bit. Nothing deep, but before he went upstairs he turned and said, "Place is nice. People here feel safe." That means something, kid. It stuck with me. That night, I pulled out an old notebook I hadn't opened in years. It was stained and battered, filled with messy handwriting and long-abandoned goals. I flipped through pages of early business ideas, budget breakdowns, scribbled mantras. One line near the back caught my eye, circled 3 times in red. "Build the life they said you couldn't." I sat with that for a while. They hadn't just doubted me. They'd erased me. So I started rewriting the story. First, I called Alex, my college roommate turned business partner. He and I had co-founded our real estate company in our mid-20s. Just a couple of guys with drive, stubbornness, and barely enough cash to buy our first foreclosure. Since then, we'd expanded slowly, carefully. But I'd always held back a bit, played it safe, stayed under the radar. Not anymore. "Let's go big," I told him. "Define big," he said, laughing. "I want 5 more properties by the end of the year. I'll handle the capital. You find the listings." He didn't ask questions, just said, "I'm in." I took every lesson I'd learned the hard way, every rejection, every mistake, every humiliating stumble, and used it like fuel. I stayed late, ran numbers, met with contractors at dawn. I made calls during lunch breaks, worked weekends, skipped parties. I wasn't running from something anymore. I was running towards something, toward a version of myself that didn't need their permission to succeed. And slowly, things started shifting. We landed a warehouse to loft conversion on the edge of downtown. Then a neglected motel I turned into affordable micro-units. Then a small strip mall that we leased to local businesses, coffee shops, barbers, a daycare. I hired staff, set up a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs trying to start their own businesses. I even started donating anonymously to organizations that helped kids aging out of the foster system find housing and jobs because I knew what it felt like to have nowhere to go. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Ryan and Melissa, not obsessively, but enough. They moved into the house about a month after the wedding. Had it repainted, got a new kitchen installed. Melissa started a blog about modernizing heritage spaces. It was all very curated, very on-brand. I didn't follow her Instagram, but I saw the posts because mutual acquaintances kept sending them to me. Each one felt like a little jab. Family brunches on the porch captioned, "Love our forever home." A throwback photo of Ryan and I as kids, cropped so I was barely visible in the corner. It was surreal watching someone else turn your childhood into their aesthetic. One night, about 6 months after the wedding, I drove past the house. Not on purpose. It was just on the way back from a property inspection. I slowed down without meaning to. The porch lights were on. Melissa's SUV was in the driveway. For a moment, I sat there staring at the same steps I used to sit on as a kid, watching the stars because the inside didn't feel safe. The same sidewalk where I once scraped my knees learning to ride a bike. The same lawn I had to mow every week. Even in July, even when it gave me nosebleeds from the heat, I wasn't bitter. I was just aware. Aware of how far I'd come and how little they'd noticed. That awareness crystallized one morning when I got a call from my father. The first direct communication I'd had with him since the wedding. No hello, no small talk. Just your grandmother's birthday dinner is Saturday. Don't make it awkward. I paused. Awkward how? You know what I mean. He said, it's a family gathering. Let's not make it about you. I almost laughed. You mean, don't make it about the fact that you gave away the house you kicked me out of and haven't acknowledged me in 6 months? There was silence on the line. Don't be dramatic, Jake, he said finally. We're all trying to move forward. No apology, no ownership, just the same expectation. Fall in line, be quiet, show up, smile. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. I did go to that dinner, but not for him. I went for Grandma because she still called every few weeks to check in. Still sent birthday cards in her handwriting. Still remembered my favorite pie. I showed up with flowers and a bottle of her favorite wine. And I walked into the same house I'd once considered a prison. It had changed. The layout was the same, but the walls were repainted. The furniture was different. The smell was unfamiliar. And yet as I stood in that foyer, all the old memories came flooding back like ghosts. Memories of dinners where I wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to, of silent car rides with my father after report cards, of birthdays with store-brand cake while Ryan got rented inflatables and photographers. The dinner was fine, polite, stiff. Ryan greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Melissa barely acknowledged me. My parents acted like nothing had happened. They offered me a seat like I was a distant relative who RSVP late. Halfway through the meal, my father raised a toast. To family, he said, lifting his glass to what matters most. I didn't raise mine because I'd already found what mattered most. And it wasn't sitting around that table. What none of them knew, not Ryan, not Melissa, not even my parents, was that in the 6 months since the wedding, I had done something I never thought I'd do. I bought the land behind their backyard, a half-acre parcel that used to belong to an elderly neighbor who moved to Florida. It had gone on the market quietly, and I scooped it up through a shell company. No one questioned it. No one noticed, but they would eventually, because what I had planned wasn't just business. It was personal. And as I watched my mother refill Ryan's wine glass, laughing at a joke he'd stolen from a sitcom, I realized something with perfect clarity. They had spent their lives building a fantasy where I didn't exist. It was time to remind them that I did, and I wasn't finished yet. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. I think it's best served prepared. And that's exactly what I spent the next several months doing. The night of Grandma's birthday dinner, I sat alone in my condo overlooking the city skyline, watching the lights flicker like fireflies in the distance. It was late past midnight, but my mind was wide awake, running through everything like a chessboard. The lies, the eraser, the house, the speech. My mother's words echoing in my head. Try not to embarrass us today. I smiled to myself. She had no idea because while they'd been busy playing pretend in their picture-perfect little world, I'd been building mine brick by brick. And now, with everything in place, it was time to start setting the pieces slowly, carefully, quietly. Because the key to a clean revenge isn't force, it's timing. You don't slam the door, you let them walk through it smiling unaware there's no floor on the other side. Let me back up. The property behind the house, my old house, had always been a weird sliver of land, technically part of a larger lot that was subdivided decades ago. It had been left untouched since the 90s. A shed, some trees, a bit of fence. I used to toss a football back there with Ryan before he decided I wasn't cool enough to be his brother anymore. The old owner, Mr. Dyer, passed away just after the wedding. His daughter, who lived in Tampa, didn't want the hassle. A quiet real estate agent listed the land without much fanfare. I saw it the morning it hit the private MLS and sent an offer before lunch. Cash, no contingencies. It was mine by the end of the week. From the back porch of the house, Ryan now called his forever home. You could look out and see it if you knew what you were looking for, but most people wouldn't notice, and that was the point. Over the next few weeks, I incorporated a new development LLC, clean name, generic. Then I reached out to a local architectural firm and said I wanted to build something small, modern, and eye-catching. A design that pushed the boundaries of zoning right up to the limits of what was legally permissible both in size and in style. I told them, make it bold, make it loud. I want this to stand out. And when they asked about the neighboring property, I just smiled and said, I'm not worried about the neighbors. The plan? A 3-story, modernist duplex, sleek black steel glass balconies, rooftop terraces, Zero lot line set back on the side that faced Ryan and Melissa's heritage home. Massive windows, floodlights, a rooftop garden that would stare directly into their master bedroom. Oh, and since the zoning was mixed use, I threw in a proposal for a coffee and wine bar on the bottom floor just to stir things up. I knew my parents wouldn't say anything publicly. That would mean admitting they gave the house to someone who didn't even own the full view. But Ryan would snap. He always did when things didn't go his way. He had a temper not explosive but entitled, the kind that boiled just under the surface and leaked out as sarcasm or passive aggression. He couldn't stand not being in control of the narrative, which was why I didn't stop there. I started attending city council meetings, quietly listening, asking questions about noise ordinances, parking permits, commercial foot traffic allowances. I didn't need the permits yet. I just wanted them to see my face, to remember my name. Meanwhile, I reached out to an old contact, Evelyn, who ran one of the local wedding venues just outside town. She and I had met years ago when I rented a small event space for a real estate seminar. She liked me, said I reminded her of her nephew, but with better manners and better hair. Evelyn's venue, while beautiful, had been struggling since co-cancellations, refunds, limited bookings. So when I called her and said, "What if we hosted exclusive pre-wedding pop-ups at my new property? Styled shoots, vendor showcases, micro-weddings under 40 people, and split the revenue." She was intrigued. I didn't even need the building finished yet. I just needed the idea to gain traction. Within a month, we had mock-ups, interest lists, and vendors lined up. Local florists, caterers, even a string quartet that worked part-time doing high-end brunches. I called the concept the Atrium. Evelyn loved it, and more importantly, so did Instagram. I created an entire digital brand for the Atrium. Logo, color palette, minimalist, dreamy aesthetics, a fake wait list, a press release about the future of luxury micro-venues in suburban spaces. I paid a lifestyle blogger to post a teaser shot from the build site with a caption, "Finally a modern venue that doesn't feel like a barn or a country club." You'd be amazed how fast a whisper turns into an echo. By the end of the 4th month, the city was buzzing, and Ryan still had no clue until the day Melissa saw the surveyors in the backyard. I got a text from my cousin Eric later that night. "Bro, Ryan's losing it. He said there's construction happening behind the house. New build. He thinks it's a shopping plaza or some nightmare, lol." I didn't reply. I just let it simmer. 2 days later, I got the first call. It was from Ryan. I hadn't heard his voice directly since the wedding. He didn't even say hello. "Hey, are you involved with that property behind the house?" Straight to the point. I admired that, at least. I kept my tone neutral. "I might be." "You might be?" "Well, I own it." "So yeah, I suppose I am." Silence. "Then what are you building? Mixed-use duplex?" "Commercial space. It's all public record." "Ryan, you're putting a business back there." "Yep. Wine bar, coffee in the morning, event space at night. Great lighting, really modern. You'll love it." "You've got to be kidding me." "Nope. You can't do that." I laughed. "Pretty sure I can. But hey, feel free to file a formal complaint. Maybe mom and dad can write a letter of concern on your behalf." He was fuming. I could hear it in the tightness of his voice. "This is our home." "Correction," I said calmly. "It's my old home. You're just the latest tenant." He hung up. I stared at the screen for a while after that, then opened the manila folder I kept in my desk drawer. Inside was the original deed, the one my parents had removed my name from when I turned 18 without even telling me. I found out years later while reviewing public records for a different property. Just one more cut I'd swallowed quietly, but I hadn't forgotten. The next step was the neighborhood association, or rather the lack of one. See, when the neighborhood was first built in the 70s, there was an HOA, but it was dissolved during a messy legal battle in 2009, and the paperwork was never fully reinstated, which meant no architectural restrictions, no design codes, and no local board to vote on what I could or couldn't build. Most people assumed it still existed, but assumptions are the playground of the unprepared. Melissa reached out next. She sent a message through Instagram as if we were just two business owners chatting over kombucha. "Hey Jake, hope you're doing well. Just wondering if you'd be open to a quick chat about the new project. We're concerned about privacy and would love to collaborate on a solution. Let me know." I didn't reply because she hadn't reached out when I got uninvited from the wedding. She hadn't reached out when my mother erased me from the guest list. She hadn't reached out when they gave away the only home I ever knew. But now that her view was threatened, now it was time to collaborate. I printed the message and tacked it to my bulletin board. A few days later, the real escalation began. My father called this time. He tried to be diplomatic. "Jake, He said we need to talk man to man. I almost choked on my coffee. He invited me to lunch. Neutral location, the kind of steakhouse where the lights are always too dim and the water comes in glass bottles. I showed up in a charcoal blazer and open collar. He was already seated. No handshake, no smile. "You're making a scene," he said as soon as I sat down. "Nice to see you too, Dad. You're not seriously putting a business behind the house. Not just a business, a brand. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing." He leaned in. "Do you have any idea what this looks like I do?" He blinked. "It looks like a man who built something from the ground up and decided not to let people who cut him out pretend he's invisible anymore." His jaw clenched. "We're asking you respectfully to reconsider, like you asked me to leave at 18, or like you asked the notary to take my name off the deed." That shut him up. "I didn't come here for a fight," he said finally. "You came here to protect your narrative." Silence. Then he made a mistake. He reached across the table, hand on mine, and said, "Jake, this could have been yours, if you just stayed in line." I stared at him, then pulled my hand back. "That's the problem," I said quietly. "You think I wanted to be in your line. I was never in your line. I was building my own." The waiter arrived to take our order. I stood up instead. "No need. We're done here." He didn't stop me. Back at my office, I called Evelyn. "Let's move up the schedule," I said. "We're going to break ground next month." She didn't ask why. She just said, "Let's make it loud." And we would, but not just with concrete and steel. No, I had one last card to play because in that same folder behind the deed, behind the city permits, behind the architectural plans was something else. Something my parents had forgotten about. A letter handwritten dated 10 years ago from Grandma. It started with Jake. "If you're reading this, it means your parents failed you again," and ended with a gift I hadn't used yet. A key not to a house, but to a truth that would shake everything they thought they'd hidden. Revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's paperwork. Sometimes it's a signature. And sometimes it's a key. Let me take you back. That letter from Grandma, the one I found tucked in the back of the manila folder, it wasn't something I opened right away. She'd given it to me on the day I left home at 18, slipping it into my backpack without a word. "Don't open this unless you really need it," she'd said. At the time, I assumed it was a note of encouragement or maybe just some family recipe. I left it sealed, moving it from drawer to drawer over the years, thinking one day I might read it when I had the emotional bandwidth. I finally opened it the night I walked out of that steakhouse. The envelope was thin, faded around the edges. Inside was a single handwritten page and a small brass key. The letter began like this. "Jake, if you're reading this, then something's happened. Maybe something painful. I want you to know I always saw you. I always loved you for who you are, not who your parents expected you to be. You were never the problem. They were. This key opens a safety deposit box. I've been adding to it since the day you were born." My heart stopped. She went on to explain that when I was a baby, she'd set aside a small savings account in my name, something separate from what she contributed to Ryan's college fund and the family estate. Quietly, privately, she'd intended to give it to me when I turned 21. But when she saw how my parents treated me after I left, she changed her mind and held on to it, kept it hidden. She worried they'd manipulate me into handing it over, or worse, use it against me. The key was to a deposit box at a small regional bank 3 towns over. The instructions were simple. Go alone, keep your mouth shut, use it only when you were ready. I stared at that key for a long time. The next morning, I drove out early. The bank manager took one look at the letter and nodded with surprising familiarity. "Mrs. Turner was a very loyal client," she said, guiding me down a hallway lined with security doors. "She told me you might come someday." The deposit box wasn't huge, but what was inside stopped me cold. Cash, a stack of government bonds, several documents, a second key, this one labeled Unit 7, a cornerstone storage, and finally a manila envelope labeled Deed Parcel 17. It took me a minute to understand. My grandmother hadn't just saved money. She had purchased land I didn't even know she owned. Parcel 17. I drove straight to City Hall and pulled the records, and there it was, a sliver of land on the other side of Ryan and Melissa's house, just 20 feet wide, but running the entire length of their fence line, a legally separate lot, zoned individually. In essence, the other side of their property. So now, I own both front yard, backyard, left side, right side. The house my parents gifted them wasn't boxed in. It was boxed out. They had no idea. And that's when the real fun began. Step 1, fencing. I filed for permits to erect decorative privacy fencing. First on the back lot I already owned, then on the newly discovered parcel, 17 black slatted aluminum, 12 feet high, completely opaque. Within weeks, crews were installing panels along both ends of the house, blocking off natural light and creating a canyon effect around their backyard. Their forever home suddenly felt like a storage unit. Melissa posted a passive-aggressive Instagram story captioned, "Some people have no respect for aesthetics." I didn't respond. I just adjusted the final fence panel so it perfectly reflected sunlight into their master bedroom window every morning between 6:45 and 7:15. Step 2. The atrium. Construction began shortly after the fencing went up. Bright trucks, loud machines, contractors shouting over radios every day from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. 6 days a week. The noise ordinance allowed it, and I made sure we followed every rule to the letter. My lawyer even sent the city inspector a holiday basket. Melissa called Evelyn to complain. Evelyn told her she didn't take orders from influencer brides with boundary issues. When they tried filing noise complaints, the city sent back notices stating the builder, my company, had full commercial rights and was well within construction hours. Step 3. The mailbox. This one was petty but satisfying. Using the other parcel, I registered a new address that ended in the same number sequence as theirs, one digit off. Same street, nearly identical address. I then sent myself packages, documents, and marketing materials in large branded envelopes with confidential stamps and real estate letterheads. Naturally, a few pieces accidentally ended up in their mailbox. One evening, I drove past and saw Ryan pacing on the sidewalk holding a crumpled envelope, his jaw clenched. He looked directly at one of the workers and shouted something. The worker just smiled and handed him a business card. Step 4. The reveal. 6 months into construction, just before the venue was set to open, I hosted a private developers preview. Catered soft jazz press invitations sent to select community leaders, local influencers, and yes, Grandma, none to my parents, none to Ryan, none to Melissa, but I knew they'd come anyway. Curiosity always overpowered pride. Sure enough, as guests arrived, I saw my father lurking by the hedges trying to pretend he was just passing through. Melissa walked by twice with sunglasses on, fake casually snapping photos with her phone. Ryan didn't show, probably too proud. We're too furious. Grandma looked radiant. She pulled me aside after the ribbon cutting, holding my arm with a proud but trembling grip. "I didn't think you'd use the key," she whispered. "I didn't think I'd need to," I said. She nodded. "They always thought you were the quiet one, the soft one. But you were just patient." "Patience is power," I said. "They taught me that without meaning to." The atrium opened to glowing reviews. We hosted 2 weddings in the first month, 3 in the second. Bookings filled up for the entire year. A luxury wedding blog listed it as one of the top 10 cheapest hidden venues in the Midwest. Melissa's own wedding venue got bumped off the list. Poetic. But I wasn't done, because Ryan and Melissa, they still own the house. But now, surrounded by floodlights, foot traffic, and the constant hum of wine bar chatter, it wasn't the tranquil retreat they'd envisioned. They tried to sell, but buyers weren't biting. Too noisy, they said. Too close to a commercial property. Property values had dipped. Not dramatically, just enough to sting. The house that was once an untouchable legacy now sat stale on the market for 6 months. Finally, they lowered the price twice, then a third time. And then I made them an offer below, asking all cash through another shell company. Melissa refused, calling it insulting. But Ryan knew. He knew what I was doing. He knew I was the shadow creeping along the edges of everything they built. He tried to hold the line, but holding the line costs money. And eventually they needed out. 6 weeks later, the offer was accepted. The house, my house, was mine again. They didn't know until the final paperwork closed, until a new deed was filed, until a formal sign came down, and a no trespassing sign went up. I never planned to live there, but I didn't tear it down either. I turned it into a community center for kids aging out of the foster system, complete with free financial literacy classes, resume workshops, and transitional housing. I called it the Turner House. The day the banner went up, my mother drove by. She didn't come inside. She just sat in her car across the street staring at the sign. I saw her through the window. She looked older than I remembered, smaller. She didn't smile. Neither did I. A week later, I got a letter handwritten. No return address, no greeting. Just, I didn't realize what I'd lost until I saw your name on the deed. I hope you find peace. Mom. I folded the letter and placed it in the same folder that once held the key. Then I locked it away, because this story, this chapter, it's finished. And as for the house, the legacy, the silence they tried to bury me with, I built something louder, something permanent. And this time they couldn't erase me. They had to live with the echo.